Over the past few years, everything has changed. Where and how we work and live, the way we collaborate and measure success, and the emerging technologies we use to get it all done. Welcome to The Bridge. Join our host, Scott Kinka, in a series of discussions with top leaders in technology and learn about how they bridge their lives and their businesses into our new hybrid work and AI-driven reality. Our hope is that the insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepoint Technologies, the nation's leading IT advisory firm. Bridgepoint helps business leaders evaluate, procure, implement, and manage technology and customer experience solutions with a focus on realizing sustainable results for your business growth. And now, here's your host, Scott Kinka.
Many of us who have been users or partners of VMware for upwards of 2 decades heard that they were being acquired by Broadcom in May of 22. We were interested, but not necessarily concerned. VMware had been bought before, after all. When the deal was finally consummated in November of 23 is when things got interesting. Broadcom announced that it would be rethinking its partner programs. Now, why is that a big deal to you, a user? Well, VMware is the Band-Aid brand of virtualization. Most on-premise server infrastructure runs off of it. So does nearly every cloud service provider not named Microsoft, Amazon, or Google. So this is not only a threat to provider margins and customer pricing, but potentially an existential threat to the hybrid cloud ecosystem as a whole. My guest on this episode of The Bridge is AJ Kuftic. He's a 20-year VMware engineer, largely on the customer side, but most recently serves as a product manager for Expedient, one of the largest cloud providers not mentioned 10 seconds ago, with a significant base and investment in VMware. He's willing to work with me to help us unpack what's really going on and how the landscape may change. If you are a VMware admin, super user, director of IT, CIO, or partner, this is a not to be missed discussion. If you find this conversation useful, make sure to follow The Bridge with Scott Kinka on your favorite podcast platform and give us a rating or comment. It means a lot. But we're talking the future of VMware and what it means for the hybrid cloud ecosystem here on this episode with AJ Kuftic of The Bridge. Hi, from wherever you are listening to us from, and welcome to another episode of The Bridge. I'm your host, Scott Kinka. My guest today is AJ Kuftic. I said that right, AJ? Kuftic?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, I like to not abuse that. AJ is a product manager at Expedient who takes a lot of the front-end conversations for that team, and I'm super excited to have him on the show. If you follow us weekly, you know that we just had Brad Reynolds from Expedient on the show. We had a great episode about AI, and maybe we get there. We'll see. But the main reason that we got together and I asked AJ to get on this show is as a product manager there, he's very involved in what's going on with the whole VMware Broadcom thing. So we're going to just get right at it and address that in this episode. But first, we want to learn a little bit about AJ. So we're going to start right there. AJ, just tell us a little bit about you personally, professionally, how long you've been at Expedient. Just give us the download.
Yeah, so my name is AJ Kuftic. I am a product manager here at Expedient. I have been in the IT industry in some form or fashion for 24 years now, which is a wild thing to think about. These grays, they came honestly. I started my career at working in the steel industry, doing IT for process control and desktop support and network support and server support. Moved into pharmaceutical support, then went to a VAR. So I worked at a partner in the Southeast, moved back up here, worked at healthcare IT as a VMware architect, and then landed here at Expedient in December of 2019 with the expectation that I was going to do a lot of this stuff in public. And then things happened in early 2020 and I didn't. So it turned
We've explored quite a bit about those things that have happened on the show over time. So maybe we'll dabble a little bit into that. But so you said steel, you worked in steel. You're from Pennsylvania.
I am from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I moved down to Pittsburgh to go to college. My internship was actually with U.S. Steel. So I worked at the steel mills. I wore flame retardant pants to work. It's a very fun time when you have to go through all the same safety training as all of the other people in the mill, but your job is to fix computers and not actually make any steel. But I supported servers and networks and PCs that supported the entire steelmaking process from coal coming off of barges all the way through to rolled coil. So it was a very, very interesting time. It was like going if you ever watch How It's Made, one of my favorite shows ever.
Yeah.
It was like going to that every day. So that was really fun and interesting. And it was really bad when things were broken and you were the person who had to fix it so that things could be made again. But
That's awesome.
it was a really fun time.
And looking over your LinkedIn profile, I mean, most of your career has been on the customer side, right? I mean, you've sat in the same seat as the people who you work with on the customer side today. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that informs how I think about how we deliver our services, what services we want to go deliver, what problems our clients are facing, because I've been there. I've sat in those chairs. I've worked directly with the people who are doing that day in and day out. I was the person doing it day in and day out. I know the pain in a very real way because it was me. So I think that's something that a lot of folks who have been in the more on the partner side of the world, the vendor side of the world, sometimes forget. Not because it's a malicious forgetting, but like it's been a while since you've done it, and so you kind of lose that you lose the anxiety, you lose the feeling of what it's like to sit in that chair and have to deal with tickets and have to deal with, upgrades and patches and projects that you're only really ever focused on that one thing that you're doing with that one customer. It's also super interesting to be on the vendor side and the partner side to be able to go and see all of the different places and the different problems that everybody's facing. So I kind of got to blend both of that. Both of those sides. I worked with a partner traveling through the Carolinas and Southern Virginia for 3 years, and seeing all of the various different levels of capability as well, which I thought was super interesting because it's like, oh, this is a hospital. They probably have really great things. Nope, this one has a carpeted data center. True thing. Or, hey, this facility that seems really, really small actually has one of the nicest data centers you've ever seen. So it was really weird to see these like dichotomies and shifts. But at the end of the day, the goal of what we do in technology is to enable our businesses, to enable them to actually go solve their real problems and actually go provide value somewhere. And technology is not really what most companies do for them as a product. It's not what they sell.
Yeah.
And so when being able to see that, and being able to understand where these pieces fit in, I think allows me to have a really unique sort of view on things.
Perfect. So you're Pittsburgh. I'm Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
You had a little anecdote about Philadelphia. What is it that you know about Philly?
I know about Philly because my brother lives there.
Okay. Where in Philly?
I don't know exactly where he lives right now.
Okay.
I know he's been all over the place. He's rented a bunch of places. If my brother is watching this, hi Casey, I love you. But it's been different because I'm from Western PA. Eastern PA is a different planet. There's this big ridge of mountains called the Appalachians that run directly through the middle of Pennsylvania. If you haven't looked at a map of Pennsylvania for a while, but the mountains really separate the state into two almost completely separate worlds. Yeah. Western PA can be, depending on where you are, Southwest PA, where I am now, is very much Appalachia adjacent, if not directly Appalachia as you go further south. Yeah. Northwest PA is the Midwest. Yeah. It is Buffalo. It is Cleveland. It is that ring. But Philly is, it might as well have been New York for us.
You always feel like we're New York's little brother.
You're New York's little brother. You're much angrier. And I kind of love it, though. I've come to appreciate the sheer chaos of Philadelphia.
We're going to have a little bit of fun, though, with your brother. And I'm not going to share with you how I would respond to this, but has he changed his sports affiliation since moving from Western Pennsylvania to Eastern Pennsylvania?
Not fully, but yes.
See, I would have thought it would have been the other way, and I would have the only reason you're allowed to be in Philadelphia and be a fan of another team is if you moved from there, right?
Yes.
Or like that's a complete, and I can completely respect that. It's the people that grew up here who were like, well, you know, I was a Dallas Cowboys fan in the 80s because they were good. Like, you lose, you're out. See ya.
Get out of here. Right? Get out of here. You're about to get punched in the face. No, we grew up in Western PA. My dad's family's from Pittsburgh. So we were all Steelers fans. Great. So he moves over there. The Steelers and Eagles don't play that often. So it's not that big of a deal. Like the Battle of PA.
I would totally go have a beer with your brother and watch a Pittsburgh game and root for him if it was against somebody else because, you know, he's born and bred and he gets to come over here and that's totally cool. Like,
but he cheers for the Eagles too.
Well, listen, you can. AFC, NFC team. Everybody gets to have a home team and the team from the other conference. I'm good with that.
Right. Go Birds, by the way. So
yeah, thank you. Hopping back to work. Is there a specific phrase around the Steelers? I'll give it back to you.
I mean, you get a here we go. Just a here we go Steelers.
Here we go. All right. Well, here we go Steelers. There we go. All right. So jumping into just back to work for a minute. We've said Expedient. Mm-hmm. We're going to put the episode with Brad in the liner notes here as well for anybody who's listening to it. But can you just give us for those who don't know the brand, tell us a little bit more.
So Expedient is a full stack cloud service provider. There it is. Got it all the way out.
Yeah.
We basically do infrastructure as a service. So VMware as a service, backups as a service, DR as a service, co-location. We started 20-ish years ago doing co-location. We actually started as an ISP, moved into co-location, and then this thing called virtual co-location came around, which was VMware as a service. And then, hey, people wanted backups. So we started doing backups. We've done web hosting long ago. But all of those things led to where we are today, which is being an infrastructure as a service provider. And in some cases, a platform as a service provider for things like Kubernetes. So we run this really wide gambit of services that meet the needs of a lot of organizations, especially when it comes to IT infrastructure.
Gotcha. And to be completely transparent with our audience, the reason why we have AJ on here, I mean, AJ had mentioned earlier, spent a lot of his career as a VMware architect, landed here at an infrastructure as a service company that has a lot of services, not exclusively, but a lot of services based around VMware. Yeah. And as a product manager, has had to deal with some interesting recent news. Yes. And we had a lot of our users kind of hit us up online and ask us questions. So this is one of probably a couple of episodes that we're going to do from a couple of different perspectives, talking about the Broadcom and VMware situation, let's say. But for those who aren't familiar with what's going on, can you just give us a little bit of historical background on sort of what all the fuss is about?
Sure. So VMware, if you are in the IT space and you haven't heard, got acquired by Broadcom. VMware has been acquired before. This is not their first time getting acquired. Yep. They got acquired by EMC in like 2009. Then EMC got acquired by Dell. And so Dell effectively ran VMware for a while. And then Dell sold off VMware to Broadcom. And in the past acquisitions, VMware's generally been left alone, almost hilariously. Because like when EMC owned VMware, it was incredible how many times EMC would come out with some sort of like new feature and not support VMware, or VMware would come out with a feature and EMC wouldn't support it. And it's like,
I know, having run a service provider myself with both EMC and VMware product in it, I get you. Yeah.
What are we doing here? Right? Like you guys have, like, when VMware rolled out virtual volumes, EMC didn't support it for like a solid year or two, which was very funny. Dell, on the other hand, when they owned VMware, they tried very hard to integrate VMware into Dell as much as they could. This is where VxRail comes from. So they originally, it was Project Marvin was the original title of it. But they were taking VMware and vSAN and putting it onto a Dell hardware box that they could then manage together as one unit. Versus running vSAN yourself on Ready Nodes. So they had these different things where they were trying to actually integrate it, which was neat. But then they get sold to Broadcom. And Broadcom has made some acquisitions in the past of large companies you might have heard of, like Symantec and CA.
Yeah.
And what Broadcom has done over the last, when they announced the change, was they specifically want to raise EBITDA off of VMware. VMware had about a $4 billion EBITDA. Broadcom wanted to take it to 8. And so there's a number of different ways you can do that. The first one is you start to lower your staff costs.
Yep.
So they
Cut
have
costs.
had large layoffs as part of the acquisition. But the other thing is that you need to go raise more revenue. You need to have more revenue coming in. And VMware's product line had been huge. They had about 9,000 SKUs across the entirety of VMware. And Broadcom is cutting it down to about 160.
Yeah.
And that is a huge cut. And you would think, like, how are you raising revenue by cutting the number of SKUs you have? And the answer is they are bundling everything. VMware rolled out Cloud Foundation in 2017, which was effectively NSX, vSAN, ESX, vCenter, and then a function called SDDC Manager that allowed you to go deploy clusters with all of the components. If you remember the VCE vBlocks,
Yep.
It's a very similar construct. You have a bill of materials that has this version of vCenter and this version of vSAN and this version of NSX, and all of them have been interop tested together. But they added in the piece that VCE never did, much to my chagrin in my past, where they actually would automate the actual deployment and upgrades. So all of that comes together to form this like one big bundle. And VMware had been struggling to sell Cloud Foundation as an overall bundle because honestly, it's expensive. And a lot of organizations for years have had perpetual licenses. You bought this Enterprise Plus license in 2011, and you've just been paying support on it ever since then.
Yep.
Broadcom said, now we're getting rid of all that. Yeah. So they got rid of all the perpetual licensing, and they're moving everything to subscription licensing entirely to start to recoup the revenue that, to be fair to Broadcom, had been left on the table by VMware for the last 7-ish years.
Certainly. And just for clarity's sake, for if you are an end user who's listening to this and has been buying VMware under perpetual licensing, service providers have always paid the way that VMware is asking you to pay today. We had a point system, and points were worth something, and every SKU was worth a certain number of points, and that was negotiated into your distribution or service provider agreement. So the consumption of, everything down to individual virtual machines, or really for a long time, it was around the amount of memory that was virtualized, right?
It was still that way up until it was still that way up until they've just recently, literally in the last few weeks, have made the shift for us. So we are also going to a per core model. Yeah. So to Scott's absolutely correct. The service providers have been in this subscription model since 2007, since the initial rollout of the VMware Cloud Provider Program. It has been really helpful for us to be able to deliver very granular costs to our clients. You were paying for per gig of powered on RAM and per gig of storage on vSAN. So you could get super granular with the amount that you were using. And because you were leveraging a service provider like Expedient, you could only really pay for what you were using. Yeah. Versus I have to license the 10 hosts in this cluster, even though I'm only really using 6.5 of them resource wise. Yeah. So,
and you would, just to be clear for a second, you could granularly sort of build up that cloud-based bill of materials because the VMware licensing was granular enough that you could embed it into the service prices, right? So am I thinking about that the right way? So basically, if I was buying a gig of vSAN, it was already loaded with VMware licensing in it.
Yes. So when you were buying storage from us that was on vSAN, it had the vSAN licensing in it. We also would do things like for DR, for our clients who were who were replicating things to DR, they didn't pay for VMware licensing until the VM got powered on.
Yeah.
So if you're building a DR structure for yourself, you couldn't do that. You still had to license the hosts on the other side so that you could fail over. That was a huge cost and was a reason why a lot of organizations turned to service providers for DR, because we were able to effectively cut out the VMware licensing costs. And you only had to pay them when you actually turned everything on. So you could burst that pricing. It's a true cloud model. The other part was that we did a lot of it through what are called resource pools in VMware. A lot of people may hear the word resource pool and shudder, because in the early days, resource pools got used as folders and people didn't understand how resource pools truly worked. We do. But what we would do is we would give you a set of resources. You would pay us for 500 gigs of RAM, and you could spin VMs up and down inside of that pool. And then you just paid for your 500 gigs of RAM overall, instead of saying, okay, I have 3 hosts and each of them have 500 gigs of RAM, so I have failover and the ability to take a host down for maintenance, etc. We took care of all of that on the back end. Also, we did all the patching and maintenance. So vCenter, the host, the storage, the capacity planning, making sure there's enough hosts for the resources that are in the clusters. We took care of all of that, which is a lot of the effort that a lot of organizations go through to support their IT infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that's really where the value of cloud overall comes in. But when they go to something like an AWS or an Azure, they were having to flip the way that they monitored and patched and backed up and all of those pieces that we didn't have to completely tip the apple cart, because everything we were doing was based on VMware. So we gave them a true cloud model with the VMware technology stack.
So basically, chances are that the first virtualization that the customer did, and if they were moving an on-prem workload, you had a very, very high chance that it was VMware based already. You had a like infrastructure with the license flexibility that you were discussing, that they could, but they're still shipping VMware,
Yep. VMware right? On their side, VMware on our side, they would replicate over, nothing had to change.
There was also great, for those who kind of don't have the full background, there was also great orchestration, even natively in VMware, around, failing from prem-based infrastructure to cloud-based infrastructure. And, again, that flexibility around licensing. So all that aside for a moment, I don't want to call it a utopia, but it became the world that we got accustomed to living in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you the question 2 ways. So all of these bundles now that the 160 SKUs that are left, I'll ask the question 2 ways. One, how is that affecting the service provider market, who's filled this very unique need around VMware, and enabled VMware-based infrastructure as a service to be competitive to the hyperscale clouds that you just mentioned? So how is it affecting them? And then, you can answer them in either order, and I'll remind you so we stay on track, but I'll obviously also ask you the same question from the customer side, like, sure, how's their world now going to change on a go forward basis? And then we'll get to kind of how you guys see resolution, but let's just set the problem up cleanly. Service provider problem, customer problem, given recent changes.
Yeah. So from the service provider standpoint, it's a shift for us. When you go from per gig of RAM to per core, those are 2 different models, right? It's like selling apples by the bag versus selling them individually. It's how do you price those comparatively? Yeah. So we have spent a lot of time, a lot of effort on how do we change our costs and how do we change our cost model and how we go to market to reflect that. VMware is also changing the way that we handle our licensing, where we are also being charged for hosts that are powered on in our clusters, even if they're not fully utilized. So for us, there's also optimizations that we're doing to make sure that our clusters are as big as they need to be and not too big, because then we're paying for licenses that are not being used. So from a service provider standpoint, this is a huge exercise for us that's going to take us probably 6 to 12 months. Probably to fully.
What happens when somebody's in term on an offering that was built around a previous VMware assumption of the way costs? Like, I guess as you're doing that conversion, you're having to sort of play the game on both sides and sort of work it out in a way that's fair for the customer, but also cover your costs. Like, how are you guys sort of bridging that gap?
Yeah, so that is where we have really smart people. I'm not, what's funny is I'm not one of them. No, we have incredibly smart people who have spent a massive amount of time of, here's a spreadsheet of all of the customers. Here's how much they're all using. Here's all of our clusters. Here's all of our hosts. Here's what's in the pipeline. And how do we actually manipulate the resources around to make it so that we are not burdening our clients, because it's not something they should have to think about.
Got it.
And that we're not burdening our finances to handle this? And how do we spin this into a better light?
Yeah.
So for us, there's two things that we're doing. Number one of the actual good changes of this core from per gig of RAM to per core change is something that the service provider space has been asking for years, which is full bring your own licensing capability.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have Cloud Foundation licensing as a subscription on-prem today, you can come to a service provider and bring those licenses with you. And we'll provide the hardware and then we'll patch it all for you. So effectively, if you own these licenses already, you can just bring them to us and we'll take care of it, which is something we've been asking for a really long time.
Yeah. And it was a no-no. Like you have customers who are like, I've made this big investment. I want to move to cloud. I'm moving VMware to VMware. I can't use my stuff. Like it was not included in the enterprise agreements that service providers had to be able to do that.
And the big thing there was never that they couldn't do it. But it wasn't like, oh, there's literally no way possible for us to do this. It was that we, as the service providers, were charged per gig of RAM, and you were buying it per core.
Yeah.
What does that correlation mean? Is it 4 gigs of RAM is equal to 1 core? Is it 6? Is it 8? What does that actually align to? So now that we're being charged per core and you're being charged per core, and it's the Cloud Foundation license for you and it's the Cloud Foundation license for me, you can bring that. And I think that's a really, really big positive shift that comes out of this.
Now you mentioned two things. That's one. What was the second one?
The second thing is that this also means that we are going to make distinct changes to the way that we deliver our private cloud model. So we've had 2 cloud models for a while. We had public cloud, which is that super granular, you get a resource pool, number of gigs of RAM, and you can grow super granularly. But some people need private cloud for different reasons. They want a VDI platform, so they need to have vCenter access. We did not provide direct vCenter access. We provided it through VMware Cloud Director in our shared cloud. So we have clients who want, per host resources. They have compliance requirements where they don't have the ability to share hosts with other clients. They want to avoid any questions about it, and they're fine to do, just their own private hosts. Or you have database requirements. Oracle licensing and SQL licensing are still there. They're just as coming for you as anybody else. So there were other reasons to do that. So what we're doing is we're also changing the way our private cloud works so that we're able to match that per core model so that we can enable the full bring your own licensing, because it still has to go to dedicated hardware. You can't bring it into our shared environment.
Yeah.
So that's really where we're making these changes that I think are going to be beneficial long-term. I think Broadcom has also made it pretty clear that they want to invest in the service providers, which is not something you necessarily asked about. But one of the challenges that we've run into is that VMware in the past has leaned heavily on the Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, VMware story, even though there were 4,000 VMware cloud providers across the globe in many more regions than any of the hyperscalers were. And so we had to go compete against VMware doing the exact same thing, but they were taking them to VMC on AWS because their sellers got comped a certain way, or it fit the story overall. When you are a publicly traded company, you want to have this like true cloud story. And they really wanted to make sure that they weren't the market wasn't leaving them behind because they weren't seen as cloud. But if they attached to all the big hyperscalers, they could get the kind of drag to go along with it. There's definitely a reinvestment in the cloud providers, and making sure that we are on equal footing. So they are changing.
Not all, or at least that's what we're hearing, right? Is that the case? I mean,
they have definitely, they're tiering out the cloud providers. Expedient is at their top tier, or will be at their top tier. And this allows us to have certain capabilities, certain go-to-market messaging with VMware. Their sellers will have compensation for selling things on Expedient, which is something that never happened before. Yeah. And that is a big, big, big deal for us because it now allows us to have another vendor partner in the field. We've been successful with other vendors who will co-sell with us, who will use us as a replication target. So Zerto and Cohesity have done sales with us in the field because we provide a value to their overall solution, right?
Yeah.
Zerto needs somewhere to go. We're a somewhere to go.
Yeah,
Cohesity, you want to replicate your backups to somewhere else, but you don't want to buy a second cluster or you don't want to have a second data center. Hey, here's Expedient. They do Cohesity more than anybody else in North America. So this is a way for us to go to market with our vendors, and VMware has always been one that we've been trying to get them to see the value and see the vision, and they're finally doing so.
So it's a good news story at a high level, a good news story in your world.
It's a mostly good news story. I will say that VMware has also, those costs also got passed to us too. So on our side, it's making sure that we're keeping our costs in line and making sure that our clients aren't also seeing the same increases that they are. So to your second question, what's happening to the client side? Big cost increases. I have yet to hear a client say anything less than like 50% increase in costs. It is significant. And a lot of it comes back to what I find to be super interesting. VMware before Broadcom really hated the concept of shelfware. This is why VMware never really bundled things, because they wanted you to use all of the pieces. Broadcom, on the other hand, very much would like you to bundle everything, and it's up to you to get the full value out of what you purchased.
Got it. So the increase, the 50% increase is not based on, I mean, they were already paying per core on the base VMware license, but
they were paying per socket. It was per socket.
Okay. Got you. So that's part of it, but the real increase is based around the fact that you just can't buy it at this granular level anymore. So you're buying the bundle and you may have parts of that you're not utilizing.
Yeah. And so you're going from, I only cared about vCenter and ESXi because that's all I wanted. I don't need vSAN. I don't need NSX because for whatever reason, I don't want to use those products. Now they're in the bundle, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And that shift beyond, so not only are you getting that bundling that comes into that of the vSAN, the NSX, the ARIA suite, all of that is now bundled in. So you now have this bundle that has actually, in my opinion, a ton of value inside of it, but you're being forced to take it. You don't really get a choice. On the other side of this is that you're going from perpetual licensing, where I paid the list price on Enterprise Plus, because I know this off the top of my head and it's creepy that I do, was about $3,500 a socket. And so most 2-socket boxes, they paid $7,000 for a socket license, and then they paid about $1,000 to $1,500 a year for support.
Yeah,
you're now going to that almost monthly.
Got it.
So that is another shift.
Significant. So if they're going to pay on an annuity, right? I mean, frankly, aside from being a box hugger or, you're still depreciating gear, like one of the big advantages of running it yourself is that you had that perpetual license flexibility and you weren't paying on an annuity. I mean, the annuity argument for keeping it local just doesn't even exist anymore, for all intents and purposes, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, you've moved everything, just so we're clear though, everything in the world effectively is moving to as many monthly recurring revenue streams as possible.
Yeah.
TV, streaming, music, everything that you do is moving to a subscription model, because everybody saw like, oh wait, you mean I can just get paid the monthly for this thing? Great. To the point where there's now subscription management software that will like look at your bank account and go, oh, you're paying for Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and all these other things, and like figure out what you could get rid of and help you unsubscribe. Like this is the same thing. The entire industry has been moving to subscriptions for a very, very long time. Yeah. Also, if you look at cloud overall, cloud has been a subscription forever. Literally, that's the whole point. You're moving everything from CapEx to OpEx. The perpetual to subscription model is the same thing effectively. You're moving from a CapEx purchase of licensing to an OpEx subscription. Yeah. And so that's where a lot of these other costs are coming from, because you didn't have that in your budget for the last like 5 years, because you were just paying for support. And if you were a large enough company, you had an ELA, you signed it once every 3 years. You had your support was all baked into that ELA, and then you were done. versus now it's a monthly subscription. It is something that is coming out every single month, and the overall total cost is higher. I do think, though, that if you want to stay on VMware, you're not entirely crazy, right? There's a number of different reasons to do that. You have an application that is certified to run on VMware and can't run on other things without losing support from that application vendor. You have a ton of ecosystem around it as well.
Yeah. You've got staff trained. You've got
staff
monitoring and
trained,
management capability. Totally. But let me ask you this question quick before we jump into the fun at the end here, because we're running up against time.
Sure.
Are you getting asked that question? Like, as you're talking to customers, are they going, well, I guess, is this the time I should be considering moving my workloads from the VMware? Forget about prem or cloud or with Expedient, just in
moving
general.
Off of VMware.
Are they saying, is it time for me to rebuild my workloads on some other platform?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. How do you normally respond to them when they ask you that question?
I respond to them with, yeah, totally get it. Have you considered backups? Have you considered DR? Have you considered monitoring? Have you considered all the operational things? Have you considered what you're going to go to? Because this is the personal opinion of AJ. This is not the opinion of Expedient as a whole as a company. Just want to make sure that we're clear here. There's two options.
Hard hitting. Yeah, I get you.
There's two options that you can go to.
Okay.
One is Nutanix.
Mm-hmm.
They are very clearly the number two. They're the number two hypervisor. They are the number one alternative to VMware. Yep. Number two is Hyper-V. If you were trying to stay on a traditional infrastructure stack, those are the two. You will hear Proxmox, you will hear Verge, you will hear Scale, you will hear KVM. All of those are fully capable of running the virtual machines. That's not the hard part.
Yeah.
The hard part is all the stuff around it. How do I back it up?
Operationalizing it in every regard. Yeah. Integrate, the applications, the workload itself, the maintaining it, monitoring it, having staffing for it. I mean, and frankly, any one of those downstream platforms are going to be harder to staff for. I mean, it's one of the things to think about. There's a lot of VMware talent out there, right? So I think one of the things, if I was talking to a client about an ROI on making a conversion on this one, I'd say, are you considering re-education costs? Are you considering staff losses? Are you including staff rehiring? Are you including rehiring potentially at a higher rate because maybe what you're shifting to is perhaps in more demand? Because there is a little bit of this question mark around VMware right now and what people should do. So, I mean, I think the headline is you've got to consider be honest with yourself about all of the cost components.
And I think there's also a number of people who are saying, well, if I'm going to pay this much, I might as well just take it all to Amazon, or I might as well take it all to Azure. So that's also the same thing, but the same questions are there.
Well,
how are you backing it up?
It doesn't reduce lock-in by any stretch going that route, right?
Right. So I think there's a lot of people who are looking at that overall shift. VMware has put a very large financial lever in place if you would like to pull it. So you can leverage service providers like us. We went through and we did our overall cost analysis of our clients and see that we are only going to see a very, very small, like single-digit percentage change for our clients licensing-wise in regards to their overall account for most of our clients. Gotcha. It is something that, one, we've done because we've been able to optimize our things over the last 15 years, and two, we've done a really good job of keeping our costs in line.
Yeah.
So we've been able to deliver this in a very efficient manner. I think the other thing to look at is from an alternative standpoint, if you're going to look down that path, if you're going to look down trying to move off of VMware, think about where you're going to be in 3 years. Think about where you're going to be in 5 years. Is this something that is worth the shift and the move if 3 years down the line, your investments aren't where they need to be? Yeah. So I look at things like 3-tier storage. Like if you're a big Pure shop, if you're a big Dell storage shop, if you're a big, I'm thinking of other ones, Hitachi. If you're in any of those sorts of spaces, Nutanix doesn't have support for that. Mm-hmm. right? So this again comes into the overall ecosystem, the overall infrastructure that you have, and it might be more of a shift than just the hypervisor that your platform is running on top of.
100%. Yeah, great
So
advice there.
I highly encourage everybody to investigate it. I encourage everybody to talk to providers like us. We have done AHV as a service. We have the ability to back up AHV. We have the ability to do AHV DR. So we can leverage those things and assist as a service provider in helping you get your workloads to where you want them to be. This is something we've done not just for a VMware hypervisor shift, but also when clients are looking at cloud, making sure workloads land in the right place. That's our whole cloud different sort of construct of you have putting the right workloads on the right platform to make sure that you're optimizing your spend and your time.
Yeah, that's right. And certainly a theme that our listeners have heard quite a bit on this show. So they're certainly, familiar with that kind of approach, a place for everything, right? And everything in its place. But I appreciate the frank conversation, Agent. I appreciate you getting on so quickly with us and being willing to talk about this. Not every service provider has been willing to have the VMware conversation. And I think getting out in the open for our listeners and for our customers is a really important first step in getting that going. So I appreciate your transparency on that. I'd like to end with the couple minutes we have left with a couple of fun questions, if you don't mind. So I'll ask you two super quick ones and then maybe one that's a little bit more heady. I'll do them in this order. What are you reading right now? Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners, or listening to? Not everybody's an avid reader, but.
Yeah. I am not a big book reader.
Yeah.
I read a lot of news. One thing I've been reading about a lot lately is the shift to EVs and how that's working, how that's being shifted around. And one of the more interesting things of Chinese EV makers. I find this in the entire Chinese EV market fascinating for some reason. And a lot of it comes back to pricing versus capability and where that investment goes and then how that expands to the rest of the world. There's a very large company called BYD that came out yesterday and basically said, we're not coming to the US. And I found that somewhat interesting, but also fairly logical in terms of, we've prioritized in the US investments into domestic makers, which is a good thing, but it means that when these other large companies that could compete in the market come in, they don't really want to come in because they're like, we're going to get pushed out or left behind because they want to prioritize these other things.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating.
There's definitely the balance of, propping up manufacturing in our economy versus ensuring, fair pricing in the market. And you have all those pressures both directions. Super interesting.
Yep.
All right. The next, pandemic is much worse and it's a zombie apocalypse and, all of our infrastructure breaks down. There's only one application that remains working on your phone, whether it be your Android or your iPhone or what have you. You get to choose before it happens. What's the one application you can't live without in that situation?
Ooh. I think it's got to be either a podcast app or a music app.
Got it.
That then means that there's still a service on the back end that has the music,
right? Exactly.
Right?
Or you're making the rules here,
right? That like there's podcasts that are still coming in, or there's music that's still coming in. But I think that I've more or less cut most of my social media usage over the last 2 years. Down fairly dramatically. Doom scrolling was a thing, and don't do that.
I love it. Don't do doom scrolling. If you take nothing else from this episode,
don't doom scroll. It's bad.
All right.
It doesn't feel good.
No, last one here for you. And you can get nerdy with this. We might end up back in tech, but I'm going to ask you for a shameless prediction, something in the 12 to 18 month window. It could be tech. It could be business. It could be sports. Doesn't matter. Tell us what's going to happen so we have something to look back on.
I think a lot of the early people running into AI are going to fail.
Okay. Tell me why.
I think there's a lot of people who I mean, just thinking back in my career, I go back to 2009, 2010 when cloud was a thing. Cloud was the biggest thing. If you're not in the cloud, your company is dead. Guess what? It's 2024. We're all still here, and 70% of work is still run on-prem. So maybe that didn't pan out so hot, right? And that's because I think a lot of people missed what the value proposition was. They just said, oh, if I go to cloud, I'm going to go faster. And that's not really the case. You're just spending your money monthly. But I think the way that the way I see AI right now is there's a lot of people who are looking at AI. In fact, it was the CEO of OpenText or CFO of OpenText that came out yesterday that said the solution to the talent problem is less talent. And that is a despicable take, in my opinion. You cannot get rid of the humans in AI.
Yeah.
AI does not replace the humans. What AI needs to do is it needs to enhance the humans.
Yeah.
It needs to be the extension, right? So I like to pick on one of my coworkers who's an SME on our cloud platform. He probably spends 2 hours a day answering instant messages of questions that are in our documentation.
Yeah.
Right. If I can put something in place that allows our users to ask questions and get real, honest, actually correct answers from our knowledge base in a conversational form, I just saved my SME 2 hours of his day. I saved a quarter of his year from answering these questions.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. A lot of the things that we've built internally, we've built things like a ticket summarizer that looks at our ticketing system and takes all the notes and all the changes and all the things and summarizes the ticket into a human readable form. It's really great. I have found that AI can be really, really helpful. My problem with AI is usually that it's wrong. My superpower is that I'm not bad at writing. I can write things. I can make things sound good. I can talk. I can make talk tracks and all that sort of stuff. As a somewhat wordy and creative person, I can do those things. That's not the hard part. It's getting the answers and getting them right. And so for me, in a lot of occasions, I end up rewriting or having to just go look up the right answer for what was actually in there. So I think a lot of people running out there, there's a story that just came out like a week ago about Air Canada and how their chatbot on their website made up a bereavement refund policy. And when the person called in to get their refund, the company was like, no, we don't do that. And they're like, yeah, but your chatbot on your website said you do. And Air Canada was like, yeah, but that's the chatbot. That doesn't matter. And a court said, no, you have to refund them their money.
100%.
That's a refund policy. This is the sort of thing that I think companies don't understand is going to happen, and it makes you look silly. Yeah. I don't think that AI is a bad thing. I think it's a truly great thing and a truly great technology, but it needs to be applied correctly, just like with cloud, just like with any other technology, that when we apply it correctly, it will work out better for you. If you are just chat GPTing everything, the cadence looks wrong. Yeah, the words look good. It's just a really confident, incorrect person on the internet, and we don't need more of that.
I love that. Chat GPT is a really confident, but incorrect person. I love that. That's a hot take right there. And obviously we'll put it in with context. AJ, this has been a lot of fun. 45 minutes disappeared very quickly as we were going through this. And I appreciate your transparency around the VMware stuff. As I said, we don't have a lot of people who want to jump right on this grenade, but we're getting a lot of questions on it. Absolutely. So I thought it was super useful. I hope you had a good time. I know we did.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to come back. And if anybody out there has any more questions around how they can, mitigate their VMware spending or looking for DR for their VMware platform or want to talk about alternatives, let us know. We're here at Expedient. We're happy to help.
Fantastic. And for those of you who work with Bridgepoint today, that's Expedient is one of our top partners in the space, and we're committed to working through each other on these types of things. We're very involved together, and hopefully we can help broker some of those conversations. Looking forward to having them, and thank you all for spending the time to listening to this episode. And we will catch you soon on another episode of Bridge. Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.